All right.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is the Your Blank What Now podcast, and my name's Marcy Nettles. I'm your host. I am super excited to be bringing you this episode this week because this woman has just touched my heart and just brought light into my life in so many different ways. And I keep learning more and more and more about her. You know, some of her accomplishments, and actually, before we get into the accomplishments, the name of her title of her episode is You're an Abused Child. What now? And the reason why I wanted to make sure and get that in there first is because when you hear these accomplishments that she has had, you're going to be abused. What? But she has been able to do so much with her life. And that really speaks to the opportunity of breakdown or breakthrough, right? So just some of the things that she's done. She's raised all kinds of money to help different people and different organizations, including a friend that needed a bone transplant. She's helped the children's advocacy centers. She's actually raised money for scholarship funds. She has been a nurse by trade for many, many years. And so her heart is really around the medical field. She actually, in 2007, designed, created, and donated a $10,000 ring for a pay it forward idea to assist students in raising money toward their school of nursing. So really wanting to help expand the field and the people that are providing great service to, specifically, her hometown area, but really to the world. She was voted the #1 motivational NWI speaker, voted most outstanding alumni Leaders Day, voted outstanding undergraduate student, and she even delivered a speech at graduation. Then there's this one here, the Gerald I. Lampkin Innovation and Entrepreneurship Center Chancellor's Recognition Award. And she received, more and more. I could just go on and on and on, guys. And yeah, I don't want to spend all of our time talking about her accomplishments because I want her to share with you, really what her upbringing was like, what her life started as, and really the hope that she can bring in her story for you. So I've got Shawn-Kristin Reynolds with me today, and I absolutely adore her. As a matter of fact, I have come to love you, Shawn-Kristin, so very much. And I absolutely know that during this podcast episode, that everybody that's listening is going to become very fond of you as well. You are such a strong woman. You are such a great example. And you really are the epitome of what it takes to become who you are, because your strength did not come easy. It definitely came at a price. So it all started in childhood, right? You had a very painful one. I would really love for you to just continue in the introduction of yourself, but then share with us what childhood was like for you. Hi, welcome to the show.
Well, wow, what an introduction, and I'm very humbled, Marcy, to be asked to speak today. Very humbled, very grateful. So instead of talking about me as far as accomplishments, I just like to get right into it, and I just like to share that, seeing that we have to go through the hard stuff to get to the good stuff. I won't probably get extremely graphic, but you'll understand. And I want to start out with my first memory. And my first memory was like back when I was 2.5 years old. I was born out in Ventura, California, and it was like snapshots, and you take those old still shots on the camera that we don't see anymore today. That's how my memory comes to me. And I'm in a swing. Actually, I was running around on the ground. I'm in this muted yellow dress. And at that point, I'm like, 2.5 years old. My sister's close by. And I see the ground, and it's just like a clay-colored, a light tan clay-colored ground, so it's dirt. And all of a sudden, I just see it bubbling up. And so there's something underneath this ground that is bubbling up about 2 to 3 inches, but nothing's breaking through. And then it goes back down, and then it bubbles back up. But whatever it was, it scared me. And I literally jumped on the swing set and started like screaming and crying. And my sister's up on the swing set with me. And all I know is that's when I knew, in retrospect, looking back, that that's when the turmoil of my life started. It was very tumultuous, and that was when I knew the first sign of being afraid.
Mm.
So, yeah, so it was. I always start my life out with that memory because it was just so burned into it, you know. So from there, my biological mother and biological father had moved us uh, down to Florida, and I believe there was a state in between there, but we ended up down in Florida, and they separated, and he ended up being a couple doors down, and we were in Cocoa Beach, Florida, and I remember uh, how the heat was just wonderful, but our feet got so tough for always being barefoot, and we would literally be running on the little cactus plants, and it never bothered us. And today it's like, okay, I'm no longer in Florida. You know, that's a good memory, even though it was painful back then. We didn't have money. We didn't have, in fact, there were times when we didn't have food to eat. And we happened to live nearby a raisin factory. And my sister and brother and I, it was a treat when we were hungry. We would literally go and garbage dive. And the raisin factory, these boxes didn't have the labels on them at the time because it was probably the ones that they were throwing out before they labeled them. And they were just white boxes. And we filled up on raisins. I can't even tell you. But my mother, I remember working. My father, a couple doors down, he was a chef his whole life, a master chef, became a master chef. And from there, I just have glimpses of good and bad. At some point, we end up moving from Florida to Lynchburg, Indiana, into my grandmother's home. And on that trip, I just remember my brother, sister, and I, uh, and being in the back seat of this big car, was probably a Cadillac back then, and my father and my mother driving, because I don't believe Sam was in the picture then. He came into the picture when I was 3, so it could have been. But what happened is that as we're driving to Indiana to start this new life, I know that my grandfather had passed, so we were going to live with my grandmother. And next thing I know, the car's on fire. So my biological mother, her name is Sylvia, was Sylvia. She's since passed, and she was very theatrical. You know, very theatrical. I have good memories of her. I have very bad memories of her. But she knew that we needed to get out of the car, and so the thing that we learned when we were little, you drop, roll, and to get out. So we pulled over, and there was a hill, and that's what she did. She just made it like a game. So again, another tumultuous moment, but she made it feel like a game, and that was awesome because I have some very good memories of her. We get to my grandmother's, and soon after, my grandmother's moving out, and now it is, at that point, it's definitely Sam in the household, so it had to have been Sam driving.
And can you tell me who Sam is? Who is Sam?
Oh, okay, yeah, that'd probably be good, eh? So my mother's first marriage was to Bill, and then it was to my father. And then she never really could be without a man. And she was a beautiful woman, gorgeous. And she ended up marrying a known convicted child molester. And that's how he came into our lives. And that's where our lives went very south.
Did she know that? Did she know that about him before she married him?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
That's what I was told by my brother. So okay. I did not ever have a. At one point, we definitely had some conversations, and I did share that, So, but yes, according to my brother, who's 8 years older than I, yes, she knew.
Wow.
Yeah, and he was a painter. But anyhow, all three of the three kids, my brother, my sister, and myself, my mother and Sam, we ended up taking over my grandmother's home. And sadly, but also a good thing, my grandmother ended up moving with my aunt and uncle, who are my angels on earth, and that will come down the road. So her life ended up being a beautiful life. So we ended up moving into this farmhouse. It's set on the corner. It's the type of farmhouse that it was gray shingled farmhouse with the front porch was breaking down, a corner fence that my sister, brother, and I would sit on and sing together. We had fields all around us. We had a train track behind us. We had magnolia trees blooming with the most beautiful scent. We had a persimmon tree in the front that were like grenades when we were playing, you know, and it was a gravel road. So it literally, when I think about, because I went back years later to see it, and I just remember hearing what sounded like popcorn when I was driving, when my wheels were driving over the gravel back to that house years later. And it was actually a beautiful, wonderful little place until the horror set in, until Sam got us. And when I say got us, he got all three of us sexually. This is where, okay, so my mother was always working, trying to feed us, you know, and to the point where, I'll come back to Sam, to the point where we thought it was fun for a while. You know, she would literally didn't have a babysitter. And so she would take us into Crawfordsville, Indiana, and would sit us right outside the bar where she worked. And she would, you know, be running out Cokes and fries and to feed us and checking on us. So, you know, I knew in retrospect, looking back, I knew this woman loved us. I knew that she was trying. She did not know initially that Sam was sexually abusing us. And what I thought was initially a fun, safe home became terror for us. My mother and stepfather Sam, they raised rabbits and chickens, and from a little young age, I could never harm an animal in my life. But you know, we were cleaning out the pens, and I remember cutting off the chicken head for the first time, and you know, watching it flop around, and it just kills me when I think about that today. But we had our chores. You know, we worked hard. That's all I've ever known is to work, even as a little child. And what happened is that my mother, she got into, she may have always been into it, but as long as I've known her, she got into having, you know, she grew up in the hippie days and Woodstock days, and she got into orgies and having people from all over show up, and they have orgies and seances. And you know, I remember her doing the Ouija board with me as a small young child. And in my 40s, I would never fly because that's how I was supposed to die. It was you know, in a plane. And you know, it stuck with me. And that's when, actually, down in Florida was the first time I tasted the kiss of a stranger. And he was a grown man, and it wasn't my stepfather. So when we moved up to Florida, I mean, from Florida to Indiana, I would have had to have been at that point about 4 or 5 years old, probably about 5 years old. So she was already around that segment of people, let's say that. Get back to the orgies. We had, initially, as a little kid, I just thought they were parties, you know, until the parties turned into sexual. And
when you say that, are you talking about sexual involving you?
Yes, oh
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
But it was also sexual with the people that were there. It was
Yes.
very, and so we're, as kids are actually taking this in and seeing it. And my mother thought she was a witch, and when the storms would come and the cattle across the field uh, would be acting up, she would go out into this. She had a long red silk gown, and would walk out into this electrical dark storm, trying to calm the winds and the rain, and and trying to calm the herd that were crying out. So it was very, very difficult time. There were times when we didn't have enough food that, literally my mom would probably be so tired, she'd open up a can of soup and stick a spoon in it and hand it to us. And that's how, for years, I thought that's how people eat soup. So, if I'm making soup and it's not homemade and I'm getting it out of a can, I tend to still to this day will just eat the bottom of the can. It's funny how things like that stick with you. But or we lived on spaghetti with melted cheese. There was no sauce. It was just whatever the government gave us. And the concentrated powder milk. Sam, unbeknownst to my mother, although she had to have had it in her mind when she married the man, being a child molester, a convicted child molester. His name was Sam Lane. He's dead today. But she didn't know initially what he was doing with us. And it, it started out sort of like a game with me. My sister knew better. She's about 4 years older than I. But he would, sit around naked. And basically, he would ask me to come over and sit me on top of him. And I mean, how graphic can I get? I just remember he'd want me to stroke his penis, you know, and and my sister would get angry, and he would do things with her, and he'd send me out of the room. He would, uh, to the point, he sodomized my brother, who was 8 years old. Uh, he, I can tell you horror stories. um, you get the idea of where it started, but
Yes.
it didn't end there. It did not end there. From there, at some point, my mother uh, had been talking to, or my brother had been talking to the neighbor girl down the street, which is down the street on the farm. It's down the street, and Karen Swinford, and she started babysitting us when my mother started going to work. So I think at that point, my mother was starting to have some sort of idea, to get the kids out of the home, even though he was still there. And so we started going down to Karen's house, and she had a lovely parents. She had a playhouse out back. It was always stocked with cookies and food. And, we'd go there, and we were famished. And so we would raid the cabinets. And, I look back at how thankful I was back then. And it was the Swinfords that had, we started opening up. I don't know how it all transpired, but it was the Swinfords who turned us into the authorities and said something's not right here. And then there was a full investigation done, because, the orgies that took place at our house, I mean, they knew, they had to find out about it. It was so loud. That was the best part about it, was the music, and being outside and catching the lights, the little
Fireflies.
Fireflies.
Yes.
Thank you. And so those are good memories. But they caught on, and the authorities were contacted, and there was a full investigation. And my mother was mortified. I mean, there were drugs in the house. The orgies that were happening, the major sexual molestations and then assaults that happened to all three of us kids, and the fights that would happen. So from there, I think at that point, so I would have been about 6 at that point. I think that's why I always come back to, this is when, even though I know in my bones that God always had his hand on me, it was when I was 6 years old. I always come back to 6 is when I felt his presence in my life. And, I always say I'm not religious, because I'm not, but I have this undwelling, unshakable faith down into my foundation that I hold true to and hold on to. And I know that is what's carried me through my years, is that God, I don't believe God can control. No, let me rephrase that. I don't believe God causes bad things to happen. I don't believe God, causes hurricanes or Katrina or fires. I believe things happen because it's called life. I don't believe God allows molestations, rapes, murders to happen. I believe things happen because we're human. There are some of us that are evil, and there are some of us that are good, and thank God the good overtakes the evil.
Amen.
Those things happen. Those things happen. And how we respond to those things and learn from those things is what carries us through, and that is how God is seen through us. That's been my belief system my whole life, that I can, as far back as I can remember. I'm sure I couldn't be able to like verbalize that at 6 years old, but I knew the feeling I had is that somehow I was protected, and it wasn't over. It wasn't over. There were still roads to travel, and some good and some very, very horrible.
Yeah.
But that's where it started. So I will say the worst day of my entire life, and I'm 56 years old now, is that the day the authorities came, and I may lose it.
It's okay.
Because it always gets me. Because they certainly didn't do things right back then, even though it had to be done. But the day they took my brother and sister and myself away from my mother, that separation experience just rips my heart to this day, even though it was the right thing to do. So the way that I remember it is, the day that I remember it, it wasn't raining. I remember this big car pulling up, and I see 2 people get out of it. And, when you live out in the farmland and there's not too many people around, when you see a car go by, you're watching, right? And so they stop, and I see these 2 people get out of it, and it's this woman in a business skirt from back then, and it's an officer. And so what happens is that they come up. My mom's already out the door before us, and they had said that they needed to talk. Now, at this point, I do believe that they had already apprehended Sam and locked him up. And so my mother had an idea what was happening. I'm sure she knew that they were coming, but we didn't know. And I don't think she knew that they were taking us that day. In fact, I know she did, because she went from being mom, who I knew loved us, and tried and did her best for us. And after they talked in private, we kids went out there. We went back out there, and we were informed to get in the car, get into the back seat of the car. And so my brother and sister, I could tell that they were so upset, but they weren't like losing it. I remember them hugging mom and kissing her goodbye. and I wouldn't let go of her. I literally clung to her as tight as I could, and she clung to me. And I cried my heart out, screaming, until they pulled me off of her. And you can't pull a kid off their mother. You can't pull a kid off their mother like that. And I'm so sorry for breaking down. I haven't had to revisit this for a while.
You don't need to apologize at all. No apologies.
I remember getting into the car and sitting in between my brother and sister. And they were driving us to some destination. And what I didn't know is that at that point, I believe they drove us back to the welfare agency in Crawfordsville. And we were talked to probably by a psychologist or whatever at the time. And the caseworkers, our caseworker at that time was Carolyn Foster. And I remember drawing, they asked me to draw pictures and stuff like that. I did. Next thing I knew, we were going to a foster home. And what I didn't know is that they couldn't find a foster home that would take all three of us. So they placed my sister and I in a foster home in Ladoga, Indiana, outside of Crawfordsville. And then my brother, who was like my father, my brother was more like my father than my brother. He was always watching after me. And my sister, she was always watching after me, but I was extremely close to him. And they separated us. It was just so much more anguish all in the same day. Yeah. My sister and I went to go live. I don't want to say the name because let's just say the only children they had were 3 farm boys. So at this point, I'm not, maybe down the road, but not yet.
That's fine.
Because, yeah. Down the road, I can tell you what happened, but I don't want to mention their name because the mother figure is still alive, and I don't think she should ever have to endure the pain of what 2 of her boys did. So out of the 3, so we went into the foster home, and they owned a convenience store, gas station, a mechanic shop, and a farm out in the country. And then they owned the house across the street from the convenience store. And that's where I learned how to work every day of my life at the age of between 6 and 7. I started out stocking store shelves and eventually moved up to pumping gas at a very young age. And I went on local deliveries with the semi. My foster father with the mechanic shop, he was also a local semi driver. They were just very driven people and a very hard work ethic. And she had come from England but had lived in the States for a while. But she was from England. And then I worked the farm. And I rode on the backs of sows and gills, and we had cattle. We had a pet peacock named George, and we had Queenie, who was Lassie, basically. We had apple and pear groves. We had a 1600 cemetery across the creek that was on their property. It was just a beautiful setting. But they ended up keeping me. Well, they got rid of my sister first, so there was another separation. They started sending. I ended up being a bedwetter till I was 12, and as I was younger, I would like when I got to the orphanage, I would literally, and even at their home, I would get up early and I taught myself how to do laundry to try to hide it, you know. But we in that home, I learned at such a young age to always work. That was my worth, is by the work that I do. And I mean, we had a lot of good times, but it was very structured, and we had to get our chores done before going to school. Before, we lived on the farm mainly, so we'd literally have to walk like a half mile, which really isn't that far, down the gravel road to catch the bus, and we had to get up way early to get all the farm stuff done first, and so that was the life that I was learning then. And well, I guess I'm going to have to get into it if we're going there, because I can't get to the next step.
You just tell it in a way that you feel comfortable. You don't have to go in depth. You don't have to throw it all
Go into
down.
detail.
Yeah,
Okay,
you don't have
good.
to do that. Mm-hmm.
Good.
Yeah. Because I think that at this point in the story, people understand, the difficulties and the struggles and the pain that you faced. And so you can just share as where you're comfortable right now.
Great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
It's not a bad thing. It's hard. It's just hard when you go back and revisit that. But it's okay, because it got me where I am today, and that's what I hold on to.
Amen.
That's what's important. So during that time, there are 3 farm boys, and 2 of the farm boys sexually molested, and 1 raped me. And it was an ongoing deal. And then they were friends with another kid who was actually living at the orphanage, who had come over, and also, in fact, one of the times I actually played asleep during the whole process. I just numbed it out. So it turned out that I was wetting more often, and so they had my sister and I, and they were having some issues with my sister, so they had my sister and I start seeing some psychologists and stuff, and being interviewed and drawing pictures and doing tests and stuff like that. And I don't even think you know this, Marcy, about me, and it's something that I struggled with almost all of my life, but I don't now, because there's a lot of judgment out there. But they got it wrong. The psychologist got it wrong. So what they had determined, they came back to my caseworkers and my, I should say our caseworker, Lisa is my sister, Bill is my brother, and they came back and said that she was a lesbian, and that I had, emotional stress. That's what was causing the bedwetting. My sister would cover for me and help me try to wash the sheets and stuff, to try to protect me, because the one thing that they had, if we got into trouble, was a very heavy hand. And my foster mother was absolutely, I don't know how you can say it in the same sentence, but she was a good human being, but she was evil with her mouth. And anyhow, from there, when they shared that with my foster mother and father, Lisa was gone within. She was fast. They got rid of her right away. And
so help me understand that. So was it because of the report saying that your sister was a lesbian that they?
Yeah.
And yeah. So being a lesbian was a good enough reason for her to be sent out of the home. And yeah. yet what you were enduring was so much. Wow. Okay. Okay. I am
So,
sorry about that.
no, but again, my sister again took a hit for me, and at that time, I didn't know. I mean, I sort of knew I was different, you know, but I didn't know. But they got it wrong because I don't even really like the word lesbian, but I'm gay. And
They totally got it switched up on for your sister. Yeah. Wow. And
yeah,
you've
but
been
they got,
holding that.
oh, I held it for years.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. Never acted on it for years and years and years. Yeah. So intentionally, because of religion, I thought I was going to burn in hell.
Mm.
So I grew up believing that for many, many years, even into my young adulthood. Yeah.
Wow.
So, but with that being said, my sister ended up going, well, my brother ended up going through 5 foster homes before the orphanage. My sister ended up going through 3 foster homes before the orphanage. And then I went through the 1 foster home before the orphanage. And thankfully, when I got to the orphanage, they placed Billy and Lisa and I in the same unit. And to describe the orphanage is it was called Indiana Children's Christian Home at the time, and it's since been closed down because of all the abuse. But uh, there's 7 units, and a unit is a house, and the house is quad level, um, quad and tri levels. And so there's 7 units, and then there was a big storeroom. You turn into a gravel road. There's a big, huge storeroom where people donated items, and that's where you could get food supplies and stuff like that. There's superintendent's office. There's a superintendent's house, and then of course the people that worked in the office, they're there. And it was it ran basically on state funding and donations by people. And Ladoga, Indiana, helped fund that place. What they didn't know is it was Christian home. And when I say Christian, it was in quotes, end quote. Um, there were, we had many parents there, and to give you an idea, parents were our house parents. We called them house parents. Our house parents came and went like they were in and out, because imagine trying to take care of anywhere from 12 to 14 children
Right.
in one house. And I mean, that would have to be hard on anybody, right? And so I don't know how they vetted the house parents, but they definitely got it wrong in many areas, because the abuse that happened there was not only sexual abuse. It was I have newspapers that are yellow now from the years, but my story, my sister's story, my brother's story, and many of my fellow we call them, foster brothers and sisters that grew up in the orphanage. Right? We literally have a page on Facebook where we can go to and talk back and forth. We're trying to find everyone, but the amount of abuse that happened there is, you can't even imagine. And it would be like, for me, I mean, I was in the newspaper because we had our chores to do. And in those chores that particular week was I had to burn the trash, right? So I'm out there and I know how to burn trash. I've been doing it for years, and I'm only, I've lived there from 7 until, no, that's not true. 9 was when I went into the orphanage, and until my aunt and uncle, my angels on earth, got me 2 months before my 13th birthday, and they got me March 28th, 1978.
Wow.
So
So that point in time right there, your aunt and uncle, after you're saying about 4 years 3 to 4 years in the orphanage, they're the ones that were your guardian angels and came in, and that's kind of what started changing everything for you, right?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, they didn't even know we were there, and we'll get to that point of how they found out. They didn't even know we'd been taken away from our mother and stuff like that,
Oh, wow.
or the foster care. They didn't know we had gone through foster care. Nothing. They had no idea. Um, but they are my angels on earth. I talk to them all the time. Not enough, but at least every week. So just to give you an idea of the things that happened there, I was burning trash, and the house parents, one of their children, Jason, had come out, and he was a little bit younger than and I was trying to teach him, to stay away from the fire and don't play with fire and blah 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 blah. Now I'm just a little kid. I'm 9 years old, and they see me, evidently the house parent sees me with a stick, and they think I'm playing in the fire. Well, I wasn't playing in the fire. I was taking the stick away from Jason, and they asked me to come in. So I went in, didn't think anything of it. Now this is a 9-year-old little kid, and they take me into their private quarters, because all the house parents, they had their own bedroom and a bathroom, and they sit me down on their bed, and I'll never forget this to the day I die. They had a book of matches, and they talked to me about the importance of not playing with fire. They talked to me about, how it would hurt, how the dangers of it, etc. And so they wanted to teach me what it would feel like to be burned. So they lit a match, and they held it to my skin, and then they lit another one, because I refused to cry. I was tough. I was a tough kid. And so they held another one, and they held it to my skin. In fact, I had scars that it could be seen until about 15 years ago. I could no longer see them on my hands. And then I wouldn't cry. And then I started putting two and two together, and they lit another one and held it, burned my skin. And that's when I cried, and I just screamed at them to stop. And they said, now you know what it feels like if you play with fire. And that was their way of teaching me a lesson. But it should never have happened. That should never have happened.
No, it shouldn't have.
They eventually left, but we sat at a table that was probably, our kitchen table was probably about 15 feet long, I would think, 10 to 15 feet long, enough for 14 kids and house parents, And the way that I grew up eating was, well, first of all, it was difficult to have food in our stomachs until my mother started raising chickens and rabbit. But at the orphanage, when you're served a meal, you don't look to your left and you don't look to your right. Because if you look to your left, that kid on your right is stealing food off your plate.
Right.
I can laugh about it now, And if you look to the right, that person on the left is stealing food off your plate. So we knew the importance of, you had to clean your plate, and you don't ever deviate from that. And so I laugh at it now. But the one thing that we knew is that if you don't clean your plate, it goes in the refrigerator, and that's your next meal. And that will be your next meal until it's gone. And it will go on and on and on until it's gone. So that's where we learned how to clean our plates. And I will tell you, the one time that I felt, besides the sexual abuse that happened with my foster family, the farm boys, I told you that the foster mother was very tough, right?
Yes.
And very wicked in her words. And I remember, and to this day I will not eat them, she had made au gratin potatoes out of a box. And she put it down in front of me, and I just knew by the smell of it I couldn't eat it. And now, so this is before I'm 9. I told her I couldn't eat it. And she's like, you will eat that. You're going to eat what I serve you, and you're going to eat that. And I said, no, I'm not. And she's like, yes, you are. And it got back and forth so much. And I finally knew that I was defeated. And so I started eating it. And I threw up in my plate. And she made me eat it.
Oh, gosh.
So I have this thing about food, and for years I had to mentally, psychologically get myself to a point where I would eat rice, because until about 15 years ago, I would not touch rice. And it was because when I lived with my biological mother, we were so hungry. And I remember being a little kid, and I see what I thought was food on the floor by the garbage can. And so I started eating it, thinking it was food, but it was maggots.
Right.
And I had no idea. And they do pop, by the way, when you chew them. I'll never forget them. So, yeah, so in the orphanage, I'm sorry, I'm just sort of jumping back and forth, but it's just to give you a little snapshot. I saw my brother's head be put through the walls more times than I can count, of being beaten. I saw, that's where, and by the way, I was able to get a clear message and have this past year, was able to speak through a message to the person who would sexually assault me and abuse me in the orphanage. His name is Jerry Lynch from Indiana. And I was able to let it be known on our children's homepage, because I saw him post something. And that was, I just let him have it and let everyone know what he did to me out in the shed way back behind the work barn of the orphanage. And turned out he had also raped others. He was in high school at the time. I was just a little kid. Turned out he had raped others. So I did find some healing in that, even though I was terrified when I'm writing this huge, epistle saying, because responding to one of his comments. So I knew he would read it, and then I blocked him. So, but yeah, so there was a lot of sexual abuse that happened there. A house parent, he recently died, did have to serve jail time, had raped one of the children who got her pregnant. And when the children's home, the orphanage Christian children's home, found out, they took her for an abortion. Yeah. But he died this past year. But he did have to spend a couple of years in jail for it. The other, my foster sister, we call today, I'm in touch with, she used to get beaten more times than we can count. We could hear her screaming. There was just so much abuse that happened there. And it was finally, again, a God thing. Tanya and Tom Gabhart became our new house parents after gone through so many, that they had no idea what they were stepping into when they took on that position with their children, who are lovely. I stay in touch with them till today. And after finding them, after almost close to 30 years, it took me to find them. But they found out all the abuse and that was happening, and they went to the authorities, and they went to the papers, and it was all of us kids, when they investigated, found out what was going on. Then there was this huge article where it never revealed who it was, but they listed all the abuses, and the orphanage was being shut down. So during that time, one of our caseworkers, thankfully, had gone to high school with my Aunt Pat, who's my angel on earth to this day. And also, shortly before all that happened, they had recently found us. My aunt and uncle found us because my grandmother had died, and they didn't know where we were. My mother never told them. So that when they found out, so I always believe that my grandmother and God's hand were instrumental saying, okay, enough is enough.
It's time.
And that was the avenue of transition, because my grandmother had a massive heart attack. And when she died, for some reason, one of my caseworkers, Beverly Beja, at that time, we went through a few caseworkers, and her husband was my grade school principal. She contacted my Aunt Pat, because they had stayed in touch, and said, hey, we have Shawn, and we have Lisa, and Billy was already gone to college at that point, and they're going to be shutting down the home, and we need to find foster care for them. And so I'm reaching out to you. So that was just after my aunt and uncle found us, and they came and picked us up, and we went to my grandmother's funeral in Crawfordsville, Indiana, when they lived in Illinois, but that's where she wanted to go with our family gravesite. And that was the first time I'd met my aunt and uncle since I had no memory of them. Now my sister and brother did, but I was too little.
Yeah.
I had no memory of them. And I fell in love with them then. And my brother-in-law, who's since passed, that's when I first met Randy. And it was just like, wow, this is my family, And I hadn't seen family aside from my brother and sister, thank God, but I haven't seen family ever. I got to see my mother a couple times during supervised visits, and my biological father, a couple times. But then the world started to open up. It's like my grandmother and God orchestrated that. What are the odds that my caseworker would have been my Aunt Pat's high school friend, who reached out? And then it became a court battle because there was another couple that wanted Lisa and myself. And I didn't know my aunt and uncle, so I wanted to go with them. I knew them. It was my house parents' sister and brother-in-law. And I had formed a relationship with them at the orphanage. They would come visit. We'd go visit them. And again, it was by the grace of God. And back then, they liked to place children with family members.
Yes.
But I didn't know who these family members were. And so they had to go to court to fight for us. And so the outcome, and I'm watching it all go down, even as a young child. And the outcome was that Judge Milligan said, you're going with your aunt and uncle. And that's when life changed.
Wow. Wow. You said early on in our conversation that you don't believe that God causes difficulties. You don't believe God causes pain or hurt or puts you in circumstances. But he absolutely is always working so hard behind the scenes, orchestrating for good to come out of every circumstance, because he loves his kids that much. He loves you that much, Shawn-Kristin. And he always has, and you've always known that. That's what is so beautiful, is that you've always known that.
Always.
And that, I think, is, it's just a fundamental strength that you were able to carry with you throughout this whole journey.
Absolutely. I'm very grateful for that strength.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's some that didn't have it.
Well, I am so grateful for your aunt and uncle. I am so grateful that everything came around exactly the way that it did. So that, I mean, because you were between 12 and 13 years of age when your aunt and uncle came into your life again.
Right,
Such
right.
a pivotal time.
Yeah, I believe I met them in October of 77 when my grandmother died. And we had one visit then because they had to go back to Illinois. And then between October of that, of her funeral and burial, and March 28th, 1978 is when they got me. So from October to March, that's how fast that transition moved.
Wow. And it's almost like from night to day
It was night to day,
in the
and I
difference
loved
for
the
your
day.
life. Yes, yes.
It was actually from darkness to light.
Amen. Yeah, amen. So tell me this, what did you learn during your nighttime, that darkness before the light came? What was it that you learned when you were going through all this chaos?
Wow, that's a great question. It's never ever been posed to me. I have always believed, I don't know when I learned it, but I always believed that things can get better. I also always believed that to always try to align yourself with people with whom you aspire to be. Like, I think that's hopefully a commonality, but there's a lot to be said by trying to lead our lives, even at a very young age. I'm going to get a little bit off here, but I've always believed, even at a very young age, we know right from wrong, you know? And I also believe that we have to own up to where we're wrong, and you have to acknowledge it and learn from it. And I think that at a very young age, I knew the bad things. I knew what was wrong. I knew the people that I was drawn to be around versus not be around. And children are much smarter than I think are given credit for. They watch everything. They listen to everything. And that's one thing that I have been gifted with is details of every scenario I walk into, physical scenario. And it's, I don't know if it's a gift or a crux, but I'm going to use it as a gift. I can literally walk into a room and I can tell you, it's like an empath thing, who's good and who isn't, who's struggling and who isn't. And I think I don't think I was born with that so much as I learned that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It comes with experiencing, because when you experience things, then you understand what it feels like when someone else is going through it. Even if you're not going through it anymore, you can still feel that someone
Absolutely.
else is going through something like that. And, empathy, I think, is a superpower. And I think that you have put that on with such amazing grace throughout this whole process. And as you've traveled through the years, because obviously you're not that 6-year-old anymore. You're not that 12, 13-year-old anymore. But all of those things that happened during those time periods are still with you. It's just that
Yeah.
you are now able to use those experiences as a strength instead of what a lot of people would have done is to fall into it and to let it decide what your life was going to be like instead of you deciding what your
Right.
life is going to be like.
Yes. Yes, indeed. And I'm so, I will always share this. I never want to live my past ever again, but I am so thankful for it. If that makes any sense. I never want to go through it again. I never want to experience again, but I am so thankful for it. And I still have a long place to go that awaits me, and more learning to learn
Mhm.
and more achievements to achieve. And I don't personally believe I would be here today had I not walked through those experiences, as painful as they were,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know.
Well, you've had a lot more painful experiences throughout your life. And by the way, guys, we've decided that we're going to carry Shawn-Kristin's story into a couple different episodes. But before we complete this one today, I have another question for you. Coming from this gratitude place, that heart space of being grateful for the things that you've gone through. I mean, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? And prepares you to become who you need to be a better tool in his hands, right? Because that's what it's all about.
It is.
But what is one thing, if you could go back and talk to your 6-year-old self,
Oh, wow.
what would you say to yourself?
I would probably say, sorry, I'm going to break down again because I've never had that question ever posed to me. You're really good at this, Marcy. I would probably say, that even though you grew up feeling so unworthy for most of my years, that your life matters, that what you are going through is only a moment in time. It's only a glimpse of what is yet to be. And I wish that I wish I could have I wish I could have loved you the way you deserve to be loved.
So it's basically love yourself, sweet girl. You
Yeah.
are valuable and you are worthy, and God loves you like a precious creature that he created you as. That you are a
Thanks for making
daughter.
me cry.
That you are a daughter of the king, sweetheart. Right? Oh,
That's
thank
true.
you. Thank you for that. Thank you for just bearing your soul today and just
Oh my goodness.
being willing to share the journey that you have been on and you've been through. Because I know there's a lot of people that are listening right now that maybe not your whole story resonates, but a piece of it here and there is going to capture their hearts, and they're going to see themselves in the struggle. And then to be able to see where you are now and the beautiful soul, the positivity that you bring to the world is really amazing, guys. As a matter of fact, every single one of you should really go and find her on Facebook and follow her, because she has just got a way of just bringing positivity to everything she does. And she's always working, she's always helping others. And she's just, she's a bright light in this world. So I would highly recommend that you go and follow Shawn-Kristin Reynolds on Facebook, and I'll make sure and put that link in the show notes as well. Okay. Is there any final words that you would like to leave the audience with?
Just that, you know what, it's an honor. It truly is an honor, Marcy, that you had asked me to be on this podcast, and that our lives are one heck of a journey, and to learn how to love it where you are, knowing that you can continue to travel so far. You just can't give up. You can still feel the pain. You just like I haven't cried in years over my past. Marcy brought that out in me, and I was able to feel some of that, again. And it's okay. It's okay to cry, and it's okay to have those memories. Acknowledge those memories. Let those tears fall. And I don't cry very often too, by the way. So just don't stay there. And if you don't know how to get out, reach out, because there's always someone that's going to be there and willing to listen to you.
Yes.
Thank you,
Amen.
God. Thank you,
Yes,
God.
amen. And that's the first place to go. Fall on your knees and just reach up because he's always waiting. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Shawn-Kristin, thank you so much for being my special guest today on your episode, You're an Abused Child. What now? I appreciate you so very much. This is Marcy Nettles, and this has been another episode of the Your Blank What Now podcast.